The airport loudspeaker echoed through the crowded terminal, announcing the final boarding call for Summit Air Flight 2185 to New York JFK. And in that moment, Evan Marshall stood still, as if the world had paused just to test his resolve one more time. He was not the kind of man who flew late, but tonight, beneath the heavy curtain of rain and the shimmer of hundreds of lights reflected on the cold stone floor, everything at Dallas-Fort Worth seemed to revolve around fate itself. Outside, jet engines roared through the storm. Inside, Evan moved quickly through security, each step deliberate, echoing like the heartbeat of a man who had long learned to live within the storms of power and prejudice. At 39, he had it all: status, respect, and a reputation that stretched across the legal world. A senior partner at Baker & Lowe LLP, he was known as the man of impossible cases, the one who could save a corporation from collapse with a single, perfectly written clause. Yet beneath the Armani suit and the quiet confidence were scars that no degree could erase. Tonight he was flying to New York to defend Northbridge Tech, a small black-owned tech firm being swallowed by a corporate giant. For a month straight, he had barely slept, poring over stacks of documents that rose like walls, reading every line with surgical precision. It wasn't about money. It was about justice. Because he knew that if they lost, hundreds of black engineers would lose their jobs, and the dream of people of color owning their place in technology would once again be erased. Evan paused in the middle of the rushing crowd and adjusted his tie. In the reflection of the glass wall, he saw his own eyes, tired but burning with determination. He remembered his mother's voice from that small house in Houston so many years ago. When you walk into a room and they don't expect you to be there, make sure they never forget you were. He had lived by that. But every victory came with a price, the price of always having to be calmer, sharper, more patient, just to be treated as ordinary. At the security gate, the scanner beeped. "Random screening," the agent said politely, though the look in his eyes carried something else. Evan nodded without a word. He was used to it. He opened his suitcase, removed his belt, his shoes, his watch, each motion part of a ritual he knew too well, a quiet reminder whispered by the system itself. "You are not one of them." When the agent handed back his passport, she smiled and said, "Thank you for your cooperation, sir." Evan smiled back, but inside, he knew that the word "sir" was just a cover for an uncomfortable truth. At the boarding area, he unlocked his phone. Naomi's voice came through on FaceTime, warm and grounding amid the airport noise. "Are you about to board?" she asked. "Yeah, 10 more minutes," he said. Beside her, Caleb and Lena were laughing. "Daddy win that case tomorrow, okay?" "Mum said you're fighting for justice," Evan chuckled. "Yeah, and justice always wins." When the screen went dark, the fatigue disappeared, replaced by something stronger, faith. He wasn't just representing a client. He was representing them, the ones who were doubted, overlooked, pushed outside the lines of privilege. He turned toward Gate 42, the glowing sign casting shifting light across his face. The ticket agent glanced at his boarding pass, then at him, hesitation flickering in her eyes. "Are you sure you're seat 3? A first class, Evan gave her the smile he had perfected over a lifetime, polite, quiet, but sharp enough to turn the gaze back on whoever questioned him. "Absolutely. That's my seat," she blinked, then nodded awkwardly. "Of course, sir. Have a pleasant flight." As he stepped onto the jet bridge, the roar of the terminal faded behind him, replaced by the steady hum of the Boeing 787 waiting at the gate. He inhaled deeply, The air in first class carried the faint blend of leather espresso and expensive perfume, the scent many associated with success. But to Evan, it was just another space where he still had to prove he belonged. Taking his seat in 3A, he unbuttoned his coat and set his leather briefcase by his feet. Inside lay an 86-page presentation, each line written with the belief that the system could still change if someone had the courage to confront it. Soft light spilled through the window. He closed his eyes and let himself breathe slowly, a few moments of calm before the next battle. But in that quiet he had no idea that the real storm of the night would not come from the courtroom, but from this very first-class cabin, where one careless action, one thoughtless remark would ignite a wave strong enough to shake an entire industry. Thunder rolled outside. A flash of lightning split the sky. Evan opened his eyes and looked out the window. Reflected in the glass was his own image, a black man in a pressed suit, silent in a seat many believed he didn't belong in. He smiled a mix of pride and defiance. If they still question whether I belong here, he thought, then I'll make the world remember I don't just belong here, I change this place. And as the aircraft trembled gently, signaling the doors were closing, Evan Marshall had no idea that this flight would awaken the conscience of an entire system, all because he refused to give up the seat he had paid for with his sweat, his intellect, and his dignity. The Boeing 787 began to roll away from the gate, soft yellow light glinting off champagne glasses, the faint click of seat belts echoing through the first-class cabin. Everything unfolded like any other ordinary flight, except only Evan Marshall knew that beneath this calm surface was an invisible pressure, the kind of weight men like him carried their entire lives. He sank back into seat 3A, inhaling the scent of new leather. Chief Flight Attendant Linda Brooks, a woman with a firm posture, but kind eyes, leaned slightly toward him. "Good evening, Mr. Marshall. Would you like still water or wine?" "Water, please." "Thank you." His smile caught her off guard. She had met hundreds of businessmen, but few possessed that quiet composure. No arrogance, no indifference, just a presence that made people stop and listen. Evan opened his leather briefcase and pulled out the summary of the Northbridge Tech case. Numbers, clauses, and red markings weaved together like a maze. He reread every page, carefully missing nothing. In his mind, he could still hear the voice of Lawrence Blake, founding partner of the firm. "You're not just arguing a case, Evan. You're standing for an entire community. Do it right. Make them change the way they see us." Evan nodded silently to himself, slipping the documents back into the case. His eyes caught his reflection in the window, a tired face framed by eyes still burning with purpose. "It's all right," he murmured. "Just get through tomorrow." Around him, calm settled across the cabin. A middle-aged couple clinked glasses, softly celebrating 20 years of marriage. A young man with platinum hair scrolled through his phone, his polished shoes carelessly resting on the footrest. Gentle music flowed through the speakers. Evan closed his eyes. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to slow down. Images of home filled his mind, Naomi cutting birthday cake for Lena Caleb, playing chess in the living room, laughter echoing through the house. He had missed too many nights like that. After this case, he told himself he would take a week off just to be a husband and a father, not a lawyer. But the moment didn't last long. A voice rose from the back of the cabin. "Do you know who I am?" The tone was confident, laced with arrogance, echoing through the aisle. All eyes turned to the tall man with silver hair slicked back, wearing a tailored Italian suit and a Patek Philippe watch that gleamed under the lights. Richard Whitman, CEO of Whitman Holdings, a billionaire more famous for his arrogance than his brilliance had just boarded. "I'm sorry, sir." The young female attendant at the door stammered, "but first class is fully booked. Seat 3A is currently occupied." "3A is my seat," Richard said sharply. "It always is. Call whoever's in charge." At the front of the cabin, Linda frowned slightly. She checked the seat chart, then glanced toward Evan. 3A. That was him. Cabin manager Paul Jennings hurried over his tone, forced but polite. "Mr. Whitman, it's an honor to have you on board, but seat 3A has already been booked." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Then switch it. Whoever's sitting there can move down a row. I need my seat right now." It all happened within seconds, but to Linda, it felt like the entire cabin was holding its breath. She looked toward Evan the black man, calmly flipping a newspaper, unaware that he was about to become the center of attention. Paul leaned in and whispered, "Handle it quickly. He's a diamond-tier client, close with the board. Don't make this a big deal." Linda bit her lip. "But the passenger has a valid ticket." Paul's voice dropped lower. "We need to depart on time. Just move him quietly. I'll take responsibility." Then he walked away, leaving her with an order she knew was wrong, but still an order. Linda approached Evan and tapped gently on the armrest. "Excuse me, sir. I'm so sorry, but we have a small seating issue. Would you mind relocating to the exit row? I can guarantee it's spacious and very comfortable." Evan looked up, puzzled. "Is there a problem with the aircraft?" "No, not at all. It's just that a VIP passenger made a special request." A VIP Evan's eyebrows rose. "I also paid for first class, ma'am. This seat is mine." Linda took a slow breath. "I understand. But he's a high-status frequent flyer, and—" "How high?" Evan interrupted calmly. High enough to turn fairness into a privilege. The cabin went completely silent. A few passengers lowered their heads, pretending to read. No one spoke. Richard, standing by the doorway, gave a faint smile. "See, it's simple. I just want my usual seat. You'll be more comfortable with your kind further back." His words cut colder than the air conditioning. Linda froze. From a distance, Paul turned, intending to intervene, but it was too late. Evan set his newspaper down on the tray. His gaze locked on Richard, not angry, not afraid, just the steady, razor-sharp calm that only a lawyer who had won in court too many times could hold. "Are you finished?" he asked quietly, his low voice forcing the entire cabin to fall silent. Richard smirked. "I think so." "Good," Evan replied, "because now it's my turn." He stood the leather seat, sighing beneath him, his shoulders straight, his breath deep. "I purchased a first-class ticket, and I am sitting in the seat printed on it. I have no intention of moving, unless there's a safety reason. If you need seat 3A, I suggest you book earlier next time." The words were precise, sharp as a blade slicing through the silence. Richard's face reddened. He took a step forward, but Linda quickly stepped between them. "Gentlemen, please let's stay calm." But neither man moved. A few passengers had already raised their phones. Small flashes flickered in the dim light, trembling fingers pressing record. In seat 2, say a woman with purple hair, Kayla Nguyen, a travel influencer with 3 million followers, angled her phone slightly and started a live stream. On her screen, the view count began to climb by the second. The first hashtag appeared, "First Class While Black." Linda felt a chill crawl up her spine as she realized something irreversible had just begun, a storm not of weather, but of justice insulted. She swallowed hard and stepped back. Under the soft light of first class, Evan stood tall and silent, his eyes steady as steel. No one knew it yet, but from that very moment, Summit Air Flight 2185 had veered off its ordinary course. It was no longer just a flight from Dallas to New York. It would become the flight that made the whole world stop and ask what dignity is truly worth. The first-class cabin of Summit Air Flight 2185 had fallen into a heavy, suffocating silence. The clinking of glasses and the soft murmur of small talk were gone, replaced by stunned stares from passengers still trying to process what had just happened. A middle-aged white man adjusted his glasses and buried his face in the Wall Street Journal as if the printed page could hide his embarrassment. A young woman slipped her phone into her bag, but the live stream kept running. Hundreds were already commenting. Thousands of eyes outside were now fixed on a plane that had yet to leave the ground. "You should be reasonable," Richard Whitman said, his voice echoing across the cabin. "We all want this flight to leave on time." Evan didn't respond. He just looked straight at the man, his gaze not hostile, but sharp enough to make anyone feel exposed. "Mr. Whitman." Linda said, her tone strained, but calm. "Please let me handle this." "We'll find a solution," Richard cut her off, voice cold. "There's no we here. I've been flying with this airline for over 10 years. I always sit in 3A. That's my seat." "Your seat." Evan repeated the corner of his mouth, curling faintly. "Interesting. I thought seats were sold to whoever paid for them, not reserved by bloodline." The air cracked open. A soft gasp came from somewhere in the back row. Linda's heart pounded. She looked at Evan. His face was composed, but there was a fire in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It was conviction, the kind that made even the oldest judges in court lean forward in respect. Cabin manager Paul Jennings stepped forward, his voice steady but tight. "Gentlemen, we can't let this go on any longer. We can reassign seats. There's an empty row in business class just behind." Evan turned to him, voice low and firm. "Are you suggesting I leave the seat I paid for because someone else wants it?" Paul lowered his tone. "I'm just trying to make sure we don't delay departure." Evan nodded slightly. "I understand. But if this flight is delayed because he thinks my skin is the wrong color to sit here, that's not on me." Richard let out a sharp laugh, dripping with contempt. "Don't turn this into a race issue. I don't care who you are. I just want my seat." Evan tilted his head. "Then why did you say I'd be more comfortable with my kind in the back?" This time the silence shattered. An Asian woman in seat 2B looked up, anger flashing in her eyes. A white man in 4A frowned, muttering to his wife. "This is insane." Richard turned abruptly to Paul. "I want the captain. Now." Less than a minute later, Captain Robert Hale stepped out of the cockpit. He was in his early 50s, grey hair, straight posture, a deep, commanding voice. "What's going on here?" Paul answered quickly. "We have a seating issue, Captain. Mr. Whitman requested seat 3A, and this passenger Richard interrupted refuses to move." "I don't want to cause trouble, but you are causing trouble." Evan cut in his tone, quiet but icy. "I'm in my seat, fully paid for. What's my offense, Captain?" Robert Hale looked at him, hesitation flickering across his eyes. "If Mr. Whitman has a medical reason or special need," Evan lifted his chin. "He doesn't. What he has is a habit, and I have a legal right to sit here. Federal Aviation Regulation, Section 382.19, prohibits any discrimination based on race, nationality, or gender in air service." The cabin went dead silent. Linda stared at him, barely breathing. He had just quoted the regulation word for word, something she'd learned during training, but no one had ever dared say it aloud to a captain. Hale's grip tightened on his cap. No one is being discriminated against here. I'm just trying to resolve this politely. Politely, Evan raised an eyebrow. Polite would be asking everyone in first class if they'd like to give up their seat, not just me. The words landed like a stone hitting still water. No one breathed. Kayla, still streaming, raised her phone closer, the glow of the screen lighting her face. She whispered, "Oh my God, he just said what we've all wanted to say." Outside, light rain traced slow lines across the Dallas tarmac, mirroring the heavy silence in the cabin. "Security is on its way," the captain said curtly, turning to leave. Linda froze. "Security Captain Mr. Marshall hasn't done anything. He's delaying departure," Robert said without looking back. "And I have a duty to maintain order." Evan settled back into his seat and fastened his belt. His voice was steady, unshaken. "You can call the entire SWAT team if you'd like. But before anyone lays a hand on me, remember this entire incident is being recorded, and I'm the legal representative for 4 board members of this airline." The words fell like a hammer. Paul stammered, You what?" Evan met his eyes. "I represent them. And I also know how to make an airline lose hundreds of millions of dollars over one ignorant legal mistake." 2 security officers entered the cabin. One of them, a black man in his 50s with a badge reading Sergeant Daniel Ortiz, scanned the scene, taking in Evan Richard and the tension that filled the room. "What's happening here?" he asked. Richard immediately jumped in. "This man refuses to move. He's disrupting the flight." Evan raised a calm hand. "I have a first-class ticket, my assigned seat, all within the law. He wants to take it, and the airline is considering letting him." Ortiz looked at Linda. "Is that true?" Linda swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. The passenger's ticket is valid." Ortiz drew a slow breath. He understood the situation better than anyone. "Unless there's a safety violation, we have no authority to remove someone from a seat they purchased. I see no violation here." Richard froze, his face flushed red. "Do you know who I am?" Ortiz looked directly at him. "Doesn't matter. The law applies the same to everyone." The soft clicks of phone cameras filled the cabin. Those words spread like sparks through the dark. Linda exhaled quietly, but she knew the storm was only beginning. Evan turned his gaze toward the window. Outside, the night sky was dark and heavy thunder rolling in the distance. He knew that what awaited him wasn't just a delayed flight, but a confrontation with an entire system, one where power, prejudice, and truth would collide and create a sound the world could not ignore. Inside the cabin, no one dared speak aloud, but in their hearts, they all understood. That night, a black lawyer had shown them that justice doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it only takes one man willing to stand still in the middle of the storm. The first-class cabin of Summit Air Flight 2185 felt frozen in time. No one spoke, no one moved. All that remained was the steady rhythm of rain tapping against the windows, and the calm, even breathing of Evan Marshall, the man sitting at the center of the storm, yet composed enough to make stillness look like power. Captain Robert Hale stepped back from the cockpit, his face tense. "I just spoke with ground control," he said firmly. "They're running out of patience. We need to depart immediately. I'm asking this passenger," his eyes locked on Evan, "to cooperate so this flight can take off." Evan opened his eyes and lifted his head slowly. "I've fully cooperated," he said evenly. I'm sitting in the seat I paid for, following every rule. The one who hasn't done things correctly isn't me." A wave of silence swept across the cabin. Passengers who had stayed quiet out of fear of trouble began exchanging uncertain glances. A few nodded subtly. Some turned their phones toward the confrontation, recording every word. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be," the captain warned, lowering his tone. "I have the authority to reassign seats when necessary." Evan's reply was soft, but every word was sharp as glass. "That authority does not permit you to discriminate. Under federal law, Title 49 of the United States Code, Section 41027, any seat reassignment based on race, religion, or origin is strictly prohibited. Would you like to see how a federal court views that authority of yours?" Captain Hale's grip tightened on his cap, his jaw twitching. "I'm not here to debate the law with you. You don't have to," Evan said, his voice calm, "because I live by it, and you just violated it." Linda, standing between the two men, could feel her heart pounding. She knew Evan was right, but in this cabin, thick with hierarchy and fear being right, had never been enough. Richard Whitman folded his arms and scoffed. "Good Lord, he's quoting the law like he's performing theatre. We don't have time for this cheap act of righteousness." Evan turned toward him, his voice steady. "No, Mr. Whitman, this isn't theatre. This is the truth you've long forgotten." Kayla, the young woman live-streaming from her seat, moved her camera closer and whispered, "Listen to him. He's speaking like a warrior who doesn't need to shout, only to speak with reason." The number of live viewers climbed by the second tens of thousands now watching. The hashtag First Class. While Black was climbing to the top 3 trending topics, outside a media storm was forming, even as the cabin still thought this was just a minor incident. The 2 security officers stood in the aisle waiting for orders. Sergeant Daniel Ortiz, the older Black officer, glanced at his younger partner before saying, "Captain, by protocol, we only intervene if there's disruptive or unsafe behavior." "I don't see that here." Richard shot up from his seat. "You don't see it. He's refusing orders." Ortiz looked at him calmly, his composure so firm it silenced the room. "No, sir. What I see is a passenger sitting quietly in his assigned seat, following the rules and being treated unfairly." The statement struck like a hammer blow against the wall of silence everyone had been hiding behind. Linda knelt slightly beside Evan and whispered, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have followed their orders." Evan looked at her, his voice gentle. "You're not the first to be caught between what's right and what's feared, but you can decide who you'll be after today." The words made Linda's fists tighten. From a flight attendant trained to obey her eyes, suddenly lit with resolve. She turned toward Paul Jennings, the cabin manager, her voice trembling but firm. "Paul, you know this passenger has a valid ticket." "I'm confirming that in front of everyone." Paul froze. "Linda, don't." "No, I have to. Because I won't stay silent one more time." A few passengers began to clap, hesitant at first, as if afraid of their own noise. But when Kayla panned her camera across the cabin, the applause grew louder. Captain Hale's face flushed red. He stepped forward. "That's enough. This is not a courtroom. This is a commercial aircraft. I'm responsible for safety and departure." Evan rose, standing half a head taller than him. "Then do your job," he said. "Ensure safety by protecting the rights of the wronged, not the comfort of the powerful." The captain stepped back, sweat gathering under his collar. He had never imagined being lectured on ethics by a passenger, and worse, he knew the man was right. In the corner, Richard dialed his phone, his voice sharp. "Douglas, it's Whitman. I'm on a Summit Air flight. There's a man causing chaos grounding the plane. Call the CEO. Fix this now." Kayla turned her phone toward him and murmured, "Call the CEO." He really thinks power solves everything. But what she didn't know was that on the other end, the executive vice president Richard had called had already received 3 other calls, 1 from the board of directors, 2 from the law firm Baker & Lowe, where Evan worked. Outside, thunder cracked. Lightning flashed across the windows, illuminating Evan's face. He closed his eyes for one deep breath. In his mind, Naomi and the 2 children appeared not as a soft memory, but as a reminder he wasn't fighting for himself, alone. When he opened his eyes again, the calm within him had transformed into something steel, cold, the resolve of a man who knew exactly where he stood. He turned toward Richard, his voice deep and steady, each word landing like a nail into wood. "You can buy planes, buy stocks, buy your way into power. But there's one thing you will never buy: the dignity of another human being." The cabin fell silent. Only the faint hum of phone cameras and the heavy breathing of witnesses filled the air. Linda stepped back, her eyes glistening. She knew this moment, no matter who won or lost, would be etched forever into the history of aviation, and perhaps into the conscience of America itself. Evan sat down, folded his arms, and spoke quietly, like delivering a verdict. "This flight will not take off until justice takes flight." And as if to answer him, thunder boomed outside, shaking the windows. No one could tell if it was the sound of the storm or the beginning of a larger one waiting beyond. Because from this moment on, silence had become a weapon, and those who once bowed their heads were beginning to rise. A sharp sound broke the air, the firm thud of Sergeant Daniel Ortiz's shoes striking the cabin floor. Every head turned, waiting for the ending. But what they didn't know was that this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a declaration written in the sky. Captain Ortiz said evenly, his tone steady, each breath measured. "Before we carry out any removal, I need confirmation. Has this passenger violated any regulation?" Captain Robert Hale stood still, his gaze darting from Richard Whitman to Evan. Beads of sweat glimmered on his temple. "He's obstructing the flight," he said finally. Ortiz tilted his head. Obstructing or refusing to be mistreated? The question sliced through the air like a blade. The first-class cabin held its breath. Passengers who had stayed silent began to glance at one another. A white woman in the front row nodded faintly. An Asian businessman behind her placed his phone on the table and started recording. Evan remained still, hands resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on the captain. "Can you define obstruction?" "For me, Captain Hale," he asked, his voice calm and low, "because I'm seated in the correct place, quiet, following every rule. I haven't shouted or threatened anyone. If the color of my skin makes you uncomfortable, then the one who should leave this plane isn't me." The captain's lips pressed tight. He turned to cabin manager Paul Jennings. "Call ground control. I want this handled now." Paul nodded and began to move, but Linda grabbed his sleeve. "Paul, stop. Linda, stay out of this." "No. I have to speak. You know I'm right." Her voice trembled, but her eyes blazed. "If I stay silent today, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. This man deserves to be treated as fairly as every other passenger." A smattering of applause broke out, first from a student sitting in the back row, then spreading slowly to others. The sound was small, but in the heavy silence, it cracked through like thunder in a clear sky. Richard smirked, his voice dripping with disdain. What a ridiculous time we live in. Now even the crew applauds troublemakers. Evan turned toward him, his expression not angry, only carrying the quiet exhaustion of someone who had seen this too many times. No, Mr. Whitman. They're not applauding me. They're applauding what's right. The cabin fell silent again. The words were simple, but pierced through the apathy that had blanketed the room. A black passenger from the economy section, Terence Johnson, a high school teacher, stood and called out, "Excuse me, but it's obvious what's happening here. This man has a valid ticket. We're witnessing something unacceptable. If this airline values its reputation, then it must also value fairness." The applause swelled, echoing through the cabin. Dozens of phones were raised, their screens lighting up faces across the aisle. Evan's calm expression now filled every frame, a symbol of the moment itself. Captain Hale's voice hardened. "I will not allow a crowd to take control of this flight." Evan lifted his gaze toward the dark sky outside the window. "You're mistaken, Captain. No one's losing control. The truth is simply being spoken aloud." Ortiz raised a hand as the captain took a step forward. "Sir, I'd advise you to reconsider. There are at least 3 live recordings happening right now. I'd rather not see my name on the morning news." Linda glanced at Kayla's phone screen. Hundreds of thousands of viewers were watching live, the comments flooding in. "Stand strong, hero, #first class. While black is #1 now, I've been through the same thing. Don't stop, keep speaking." The world outside was on fire in real time. And inside the cabin, those who had once kept their heads down were beginning to lift them. Evan took out his phone and made a call. "Lawrence," he said calmly, "I need you to speak now. They're trying to forcibly remove me from my seat." The voice that answered filled the entire cabin through the speaker. "Evan put me on speaker," said Lawrence Blake. "I'll address them directly." Evan set the phone on the armrest and pressed the speaker button. "This is Lawrence Blake, managing partner of Baker and Lowe LLP. Let me remind everyone that our firm represents 3 members of Summit Air's board of directors. If any act of discrimination takes place here, you are not only endangering a passenger, you are walking straight into federal litigation." The cabin erupted in whispers. Captain Hale's face went pale. Richard froze, his eyes darting back and forth. Linda nearly burst into tears of relief. "And as for you, Mr. Whitman," Lawrence continued, his tone sharp as steel, "remember this, within 48 hours, every word you've spoken will be in the company's internal investigation file and the viral video now spreading across the internet. My advice, stay silent before you destroy your own career." Richard's face turned crimson. His hands shook as he tried to dial another number, but his fingers fumbled uselessly. Kayla turned her camera toward him, whispering, "He's calling for backup. But it looks like every line of power he's ever relied on is collapsing right here." Captain Hale stepped back, glancing from Evan to Ortiz. "I'll notify ground operations. They'll send a senior representative." Ortiz nodded. "That would be best." Then he turned to Evan, his voice softening. "You did the right thing. Sometimes standing up doesn't mean shouting. It just means not sitting down." Evan smiled faintly. "I only wanted to fly like everyone else, but it seems fate wanted me to fly a little higher." Laughter rippled through the cabin, not mocking, but like the release of long-held breath. Linda stood silently. To her, Evan was no longer just a passenger. He had become a mirror for everyone who had ever endured in silence. 10 minutes later, Monica Reyes, Summit Air's regional manager, boarded the plane. Her face was tense, her phone still pressed to her ear as someone shouted on the other end. She took a deep breath and stepped into the aisle. "My apologies for the incident. We'll resolve this immediately." Evan said nothing, waiting. Monica turned to Richard. "Mr. Whitman, the airline can rebook you on another flight or arrange a different seat in first class." Richard's jaw dropped. Do you know who I am?" "Yes," Monica replied, steady. "And that's exactly why I have to make sure you're not allowed to act wrongly without consequence." The cabin erupted. Applause thundered through the air, blending with the pounding rain outside the window. Linda looked at Evan and smiled, the first genuine smile she'd had in 15 years on the job. "Thank you, sir, for not staying silent." Evan nodded slightly. His eyes swept across the cabin faces of every color looking back at him. The distance between them was gone, replaced by a single truth. Outside, thunder rolled once more, but this time no one was afraid, because everyone knew justice had finally found its voice, and it was echoing right there in the first-class cabin. When Monica Reyes stepped out of the cabin to take a call, the airplane door closed behind her, leaving first class wrapped in silence, a silence that no longer meant fear, but awakening. Every passenger understood that what they had just witnessed went far beyond a dispute over a seat. They had just seen justice being born in real life. Outside, the rain fell harder. On the glowing phone screens, Kayla Nguyen continued her live stream, her voice trembling with emotion. "We're still on Flight 2185. This man, Evan Marshall, was told to give up his first-class seat because a wealthy CEO wanted it. But he refused. He didn't get angry. He quoted the law. He stood firm, and the entire cabin stood with him. The view count surged 10,000, 50,000, then 200,000. Within 20 minutes, the hashtag first class. While Black had flooded Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit, quick-cut clips spread like wildfire through the stormy night. A black lawyer just shut down an entire airline with calm precision. He didn't shout. He didn't move. He just stood his ground. The public didn't know that, at that very moment, inside Summit Air's Dallas headquarters, another kind of earthquake was unfolding. The emergency operations room blazed with light. Stephen Grant, the airline's CEO, stood in the center, tie loosened eyes, bloodshot from a barrage of non-stop calls. "We're losing control of the narrative," his voice rasped. "Can someone tell me what in God's name is happening on Flight 2185? Laura Kim, the company's chief legal counsel, scrolled quickly through a live update on the screen. The video is going viral worldwide. The passenger's name is Evan Marshall, senior partner at Baker & Lowe, the firm handling our merger documentation. He represents 3 members of our own board." Stephen froze. "What did you just say?" And Laura added, "A security officer on board has already confirmed visible discrimination. The press is calling it the first-class incident." A PR officer broke in nervously. "Our stock just dropped 4% in the last 30 minutes. Another added, "Montgomery Industries, Richard Whitman's company, is crashing too. Their names are side by side on CNN right now." Stephen slammed his fist on the table. "Jesus Christ!" His eyes cut to Laura, sharp and cold. "If that passenger decides to sue, we're finished. I want to speak to him. Now, on the plane. Set up a video link. Back on Flight 2185. Monica Reyes returned to the cabin, pale but composed. "Mr. Marshall," she said softly, "the CEO would like to speak with you directly." Evan simply nodded. "Go ahead." A tablet was brought over. The screen flickered to life, showing the weary but determined face of Stephen Grant. "Mr. Marshall," he began, "first allow me to apologize on behalf of Summit Air. I've seen the footage. This incident in no way reflects our values as a company." Evan looked directly into the screen, his voice deep and calm. "An apology is a start. But I'm not asking for one just for myself. I want your commitment that what happened to me will never happen to anyone else." Stephen hesitated, then said, "We're prepared to discuss all reasonable actions," Evan spoke slowly measured. "Then start by acknowledging fault, publicly, right here on this flight." A pause followed. Then Stephen nodded. "I'll do it now," he motioned to Monica. "Patch me into the cabin speakers." Seconds later, Stephen Grant's voice echoed through the plane's intercom system. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Stephen Grant, CEO of Summit Air. I want to offer my deepest apologies to all passengers, and especially to Mr. Evan Marshall, for the shameful incident that occurred on board. This is a failure of our system, not of any individual." The cabin was utterly silent. From this moment forward, he continued, "We are launching the Summit Equity Initiative, a complete reform of our training programs, service policies, and oversight protocols to ensure fairness for every passenger, regardless of race or status. And I want to thank Mr. Marshall for opening our eyes to this failure." Linda covered her mouth tears, streaming freely. Kayla whispered, "Oh my God, they just apologized publicly on the plane." Applause erupted. No hesitation, no fear. Passengers who had once stayed quiet were now standing. They weren't just supporting Evan, they were standing up for themselves. Richard Whitman sat hunched in seat 5C, his face burning red. His phone buzzed relentlessly with messages from the Whitman Holdings board. One notification glared on his screen. "Urgent, you are suspended from duty. Do not speak to the press." His hands trembled as he let the phone slip. The power that had once defined him was dissolving in mere hours. Evan glanced at him, not with triumph, but with quiet understanding. Justice wasn't about winning. It was about restoring balance. He turned to Monica. "I'll be sending a detailed proposal for the reform program. I don't want this to end with an apology." Monica nodded, her voice hoarse. "We'll do whatever it takes." 30 minutes later, while the plane still hadn't taken off, social media had exploded. CNN, NBC, Al Jazeera, and Reuters all carried the headline, "Black Lawyer Forces Airline to Apologize Mid-Flight Sparks Nationwide Debate." The hashtag Evan Marshall topped global trends. Hundreds of thousands of comments called him the calm storm. Linda looked at him and whispered, "You didn't just keep your seat. You gave hope back to so many." Evan smiled faintly. "All I did was sit still. But maybe this time sitting still was the biggest thing I've ever done." Outside, thunder still rumbled, but inside the cabin something felt different, as if the plane hadn't even taken off yet. Everyone aboard had already risen above the ground. They had just witnessed a man awaken an entire system through nothing more than the quiet strength of justice. And in that moment, everyone knew the story wouldn't end when the plane landed. News spread faster than thunder. While Summit Air Flight 2185 still sat on the rain-soaked runway in Dallas, the world outside had already erupted. CNN broke the story. The New York Times ran the headline, "Black Lawyer Forces Airline to Apologize Mid-Flight Ignites Global Debate on Racial Equality in Air Travel." Within 2 hours, Kaylan Nguyen's video had surpassed 12 million views, hundreds of thousands of comments, and countless reposts sharing one line that had become a worldwide rallying cry. I'm not asking for privilege. I'm asking for equality. Evan Marshall. Inside the cabin, passengers were still processing what had just happened. Linda Brooks carefully poured a glass of water for Evan, her voice trembling slightly. No one has ever made a CEO apologize live on a plane before. Do you know that the crew in the back is talking about you? Evan smiled, his voice quiet, but strong enough for those nearby to hear. I don't want them talking about me. I want them talking about the issue. Linda looked at him, admiration shining through her eyes. A man who didn't shout, didn't threaten, yet made an entire system bow its head, a symbol not of power, but of dignity. In the row behind, Richard Whitman sat hunched, silent. His phone buzzed endlessly in his hand. The final message from his assistant read, "The board has held an emergency meeting. The press is surrounding headquarters. You are officially suspended from all duties." He looked up and realized no one was looking at him anymore. The man who once made airlines bend now sat as a shadow, swallowed by the very storm he created. In Evan's calm gaze, there was no hatred, only an unspoken message: justice is not revenge. It is awakening. The cabin door opened again. Monica Reyes returned this time with 2 others, Marcus Lee, Regional Director of Human Resources, and more surprisingly, Eleanor Prescott, Vice President of Diversity and Corporate Culture. Her face was stern, but her eyes carried genuine remorse. Mr. Marshall, Eleanor began slowly. We've been authorized to present Summit Air's immediate action plan. Not because you demanded it, but because of what you represent. May we have a moment of your time? Evan nodded. All eyes turned toward them. Eleanor unfolded a folder, her tone firm and clear. Effective tomorrow, Summit Air will publicly accept full responsibility. Within 30 days, we will launch the Equity Above All initiative, which includes mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, an independent oversight board, with authority to review discrimination cases, quarterly transparency reports on all complaints and resolutions, and most importantly, we would like to invite you, Mr. Marshall, to serve as an independent advisor to the executive board. The cabin erupted in murmurs of disbelief. Linda nearly broke into tears. They're really changing. Evan stood silently for a few seconds. Then he looked around the cabin, meeting the eyes of those who had witnessed everything. This is a beginning, he said. But don't change because you fear public outrage. Change because you understand why it was wrong. Eleanor bowed her head, her voice tight with emotion. You have our word. Kayla kept her camera rolling. She whispered, My God, this isn't just an incident. This is a turning point. The live comments poured in faster than she could read. This is the Rosa Parks moment of the 21st century. Evan Marshall just made the world rethink equality. One man, one seat, one act, and the system shifted. Meanwhile, at Whitman Holdings, headquarters just a few miles away, Richard had become the center of an emergency meeting. Chairwoman Carolyn Blake's voice was icy. We can't keep him. The discriminatory behavior is on video. Multiple partners are already terminating contracts. Another executive added, This is irreparable reputational damage. Stock is down 9% and still falling. The board voted unanimously on the call. Richard Whitman is permanently removed from his position. As the news alert spread, phones in Flight 2185 chimed in unison. Kayla looked up, beaming. It's official. He's out. Linda placed a gentle hand on Evan's shoulder. Justice came faster than I thought. Evan replied quietly. Sometimes justice doesn't need to knock. It just needs someone who refuses to give up their seat. At that same moment in the airline's operations center, CEO Stephen Grant stood before reporters beginning a live press conference. Tonight's event isn't just an apology, he declared. It's a commitment. From this day forward, every airline must remember, respect is not a privilege. It's an obligation. The words echoed across every major network, but the world didn't just remember what he said, they remembered the man who made him say it. 3 hours later, Flight 2185 finally took off. As the engines roared and the lights of Dallas faded beneath them, the entire cabin seemed to exhale in unison. Linda passed by and gently placed a hand on Evan's shoulder. "Would you like anything to drink?" Evan looked up with a faint smile. "No, thank you. I just want a moment of quiet." He turned toward the window. Beyond it, dark clouds split apart under flashes of distant lightning. Through the storm, the plane climbed higher, steady and unshaken. And in that moment, Evan understood he hadn't just kept a seat. He had made the world rethink what it means to have one. From a man who simply sat still in first class, Evan Marshall had become an invisible pilot guiding the world toward justice. When Summit Air Flight 2185 touched down at New York JFK, the clock was nearing 3 in the morning. Outside, a cold mist blanketed the runway in a pale haze, but inside the plane the air was alive with quiet anticipation. No one rushed to leave their seats. No one spoke. Everyone knew they had just witnessed history. A middle-aged woman, her voice trembling, turned to Evan. "Thank you, Mr. Marshall. I have 2 children, and tonight I'll tell them that I saw what justice looks like." Evan gave a tired but warm smile. "Justice isn't magic, Mom. It's just what happens when someone finally says enough at the right moment." The wind hissed against the aircraft's body, as if applauding his words. As passengers began gathering their belongings, Kayla Nguyen kept streaming live until the very end. Her face glowed beneath the dim cabin lights. "We've just landed," she said softly. "Everyone on this flight has seen something extraordinary. A man was told to leave his seat, and with nothing but calm and knowledge, he made an entire airline bow in apology. I don't think I'll ever fly in silence again." Comments poured in. "He's the symbol of a new generation. Not anger, but intelligence. That's what makes the powerful tremble. Hashtag Evan Marshall, the calm storm." Kayla turned off her phone and sank into her seat, tears streaming down her face. She knew this video would not just go viral, it would become a social declaration. At the front of the cabin, Monica Reyes and Linda Brooks stood side by side, watching passengers disembark. "You know," Linda whispered, "I've stayed silent through so many things like this. Today I learned no one can call themselves professional if they choose silence in the face of injustice." Monica nodded. "I used to think this system couldn't change, but maybe it only needed one person strong enough to remind it what's right." Both women looked toward Evan, the last passenger to leave the plane. His stride steady, his dark coat catching the soft gleam of the airport lights. No one said a word, but they all knew the man had changed the way they saw their profession forever. Outside the gate, reporters lined up as if awaiting a head of state. Camera flashes burst in rapid fire. "Mr. Marshall, are you planning to sue the airline? What do you think about CEO Richard Whitman being fired? Are you considering entering politics?" Evan stopped amid the crowd and raised a hand for silence. His voice carried clearly through the noise, low, steady, deliberate. "I don't want to sue anyone. I want to change what makes us need to sue each other." and politics no. I didn't do this to gain power, but to remind everyone that true power is the courage to stand for what's right, even when you stand alone. The cameras froze for a moment. A young reporter, eyes glistening, whispered, "Thank you." Meanwhile, at Summit Air's New York headquarters, a team of media strategists, lawyers, and executives worked through the night. On the main screen, news of Evan filled the broadcast. CEO Stephen Grant looked around the exhausted room. "We can't hide from this. By morning, I want a full reform plan on my desk. And as for Evan Marshall, we need to bring him in as a special advisor. Not just to save our reputation, but because he's just shown us what justice truly means." Laura Kim, the general counsel, nodded. "I've already reached out. He agreed to meet at 9 a.m., but what Stephen asked, he doesn't want to discuss personal compensation. He wants to discuss policy." Stephen gave a faint laugh. "Good. A man like that deserves a seat at my table. At 4 a.m. Evan walked into a small hotel lobby in Midtown Manhattan. Naomi was waiting. She ran to him, wrapping her arms tightly around his shoulders, tears soaking through his coat. "I saw the whole video," she whispered. "You were so calm it scared me." Evan chuckled softly. "If you ever saw me tremble, then I've already lost." She pulled back and looked at him, tired but his eyes still bright. "You know the kids woke up in the middle of the night, watched the news, and shouted, 'Dad's a hero.'" Evan smiled. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who refused to get up when they told me to move down." Naomi squeezed his hand. "That's exactly why they call you one." By morning, as the first rays of sunlight spilled through Manhattan's glass towers, the American media was saturated with Evan's story. NBC opened with the headline, "From Seat 3A to a New Era." Other airlines issued urgent statements. "We are reviewing our service procedures to ensure all passengers are treated equally." Summit Air's stock rebounded sharply, while Whitman Holdings, the company of the disgraced Richard Whitman, continued to plunge. The press called it the price of prejudice. Evan sat in a small cafe near Central Park, watching the morning crowd rush by. A white boy in a grey hoodie approached his table timidly. "So my dad says you're the man who made people start respecting each other." Evan leaned down, smiling gently. "No, son. I just reminded them that everyone deserves respect." The boy nodded, eyes wide and clear. "I'll remember that." As the child ran off, Evan watched him go and slowly sipped his coffee. Amid the car horns and footsteps of a city awakening, his heart felt unusually still. The story of Flight 2185 was no longer just news, it had become a movement. From major airports to small companies, from family dinner tables to political forums, people were talking, debating, sharing, and most importantly, reflecting. And when night fell again, Manhattan's lights shimmered across the skyline. Evan watched their reflection in the cafe window. A year ago, he had been just another passenger in first class. Now he was the man who made the world ask, "What does first class really mean?" He smiled faintly and whispered to himself, "Maybe first class is when you choose to stand on the side of what's right, even if you're standing alone." 2 weeks after the Seat 3. Incident. America still hadn't moved on. From New York to Los Angeles, airport billboards now displayed the same bold message, "Respect every passenger." Ton trong moi han kach. In Summit Air's new employee training videos, Evan Marshall appeared on screen, saying calmly, "No one needs special treatment. We just need to be treated fairly." Every employee, from pilots and flight attendants to ticket agents, was now required to complete the new equity training program that Evan himself had helped design. In the boardroom of Summit Air's Dallas headquarters, CEO Stephen Grant introduced Evan before the entire executive team. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "this isn't just the lawyer who forced us to change. He's the man who helped us reclaim the soul of our company." Evan stepped forward. His voice wasn't loud, but each word rang out with the clarity of metal striking glass. Fairness is not a slogan. It's an action repeated every day until no one needs to be reminded of it anymore. The applause that followed was not polite or procedural. It came from the hearts of people who had just seen what doing the right thing truly looked like. Across social media, the movement known as the Marshall Principle was spreading fast. Users shared their own stories, employees standing up to unfair bosses, flight attendants defending passengers from humiliation, students confronting discrimination in their schools. A simple hashtag had turned into a rallying cry. Hold your position, whether it's your seat or your dignity. One late afternoon, Evan and Naomi walked with their 2 children through Central Park. The wind was gentle, carrying golden leaves in slow spirals. Dad, his son Caleb, asked, "People say you changed the whole airline industry. Is that true?" Evan smiled, taking his son's hand. "I didn't change the airline industry, son. I just reminded them that everyone on a plane deserves to fly the same way." Naomi looked at him, her smile soft but proud. "You didn't just remind them," she said. "You made them follow through." High above, a Summit Air jet crossed the sky, its fuselage now bearing new words painted in bold letters, "Equity above all." Inside the cabin, passengers applauded as the flight attendant's voice came over the intercom. "Thank you for flying with us, where everyone is first class." On the ground below, Evan looked up, his eyes reflecting a quiet faith. He realized that justice was never something that fell from the sky. It was built step by step by those who had the courage to lift their heads. And for Evan Marshall, that flight had never truly ended. 1 year later, the name Evan Marshall no longer appeared only in news headlines. It was now part of law school curricula, corporate ethics training sessions, and printed across the cover of the best-selling book in America, First Class Citizenship, When Dignity Becomes Power. On that crisp autumn morning, Evan stood at the podium inside the United Nations headquarters in New York, invited to speak at the Global Equality Summit. Below him, hundreds of delegates from nations around the world listened attentively. Sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, casting a glow over his face. Calm, composed, and resolute, the same presence that had once changed the course of history. "A year ago," he began, "I was asked to give up the first-class seat I had paid for simply because someone believed I didn't belong there. But what made me stand up that day wasn't anger. It was a question. If I stayed silent today, who would speak up tomorrow?" He paused, scanning the room. Justice doesn't begin in a courtroom. It begins in how we treat one another. Every time we stay silent in the face of wrongdoing, we teach others that it's acceptable. But when one person says, "No," the whole world has to listen. The applause thundered through the hall. A few delegates rose to their feet, tears glistening in their eyes. Evan bowed his head slightly, not out of pride, but gratitude. Gratitude for everyone who had believed that change was possible. That afternoon, he flew back to Chicago with Naomi and their 2 children. On the very same airline, Summit Air, a flight attendant handed them a small card. "Dear Mr. Marshall," it read, "thank you for helping us become a better airline. Every time we fly, we remember you." Evan smiled, folded the card carefully, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He looked out the window. The sun was setting, painting the airplane wings in hues of gold and crimson. Caleb rested his head on his father's shoulder and asked softly, "Dad, does justice ever end?" Evan gently ran his hand through his son's hair and replied, "No, son. It just keeps flying from one person to another." The aircraft soared into the sky, bathed in amber light, its reflection glowing in Evan's eyes like a flame that would never fade. A year ago he had only held on to his seat. Now he was holding on to hope for an entire generation, the belief that fairness doesn't have to be requested, it only needs to be affirmed. And as the horizon opened wide before him, Evan Marshall smiled quietly to himself. First class, he whispered, isn't about where you sit, but how you stand. From the perspective of an expert in leadership ethics and corporate reform, the story of Evan Marshall is far more than an in-flight incident. It is a testament to the power of intellect and dignity. He did not shout, he did not rage, and he did not fight back with authority. He responded with knowledge, composure, and an unshakable belief in justice. And that is what made an entire system stop, look inward, and change. Evan reminds us that, in a world full of noise and haste, sometimes the most powerful act is calmness itself. Because calmness is not weakness, it is the highest form of true power, the power of someone who knows who they are and what is right. If you believe that fairness does not come from privilege, but from the courage to stand up for what is right, like to share this message. And if you want to continue following stories where dignity triumphs over prejudice, subscribe to our channel so that each video is not just a story, but a reminder of human strength. Finally, leave a comment below with a short phrase that expresses your belief, a small promise to yourself that justice still exists. Hold your dignity.